Reb Nachman of Bratslav was in the active stages of dying on his final Rosh Hashanah in 1810. He ended up holding on until the second day of Sukkot, but by the time Rosh Hashanah came around, he was in bad shape, coughing up blood and having difficulty leaving his room. His people figured that he was too sick to give a sermon, but he insisted. He gathered everyone around, held a bowl in his lap for the blood that he was coughing, and he went for it. He started with a very important topic, how to give and receive tochacha, that is, caring rebuke. And then he pivoted. And I'm guessing that these last words that he publicly shared meant a great deal to him. These are the words that he chose to culminate his life's work. He started talking about the power of imagination. Koach hamdameh. I want to go there today too. But before we imagine, let's just take a look around at our world today. It's been a year. Federal employees and so many others losing their jobs, not just salaries and benefits, but senses of professional purpose and respect. ICE terrorizing migrants in American cities, American citizens alike, separating families in our city and beyond. Free speech held in question, transgender members of the military fired for being themselves, anti-Semitic murders and attempted murders, and a wide, abundant variety of other shootings. Israeli elders and parents with little ones struggling to make it to bomb shelters in time. Palestinian civilians starving and dying without bomb shelters available at all. Emaciated hostages digging their own graves. So many natural disasters. So many personal struggles. It's been so much. I'll be real with you. I have felt pretty powerless this year. And I'm guessing that many of you feel the same way. We're watching all these horrors going on around us, and what can we honestly do to stop them? Sometimes it feels like anything we might try would be either too small to be meaningful or too daunting to be feasible. I have felt guilty for feeling powerless. It doesn't feel particularly brave or useful to be this cynical, but it's a real feeling, particularly during years like this. So let's get into Reb Nachman's final words of Torah for Rosh Hashanah, that of imagination. He took his people through some steps. He said, first, you need to be able to imagine, and you need to be willing to imagine. Without that imagination, you can't trust or have faith in much of anything. There is, after all, only so much we can know with certainty in this world, and we need to be able to trust in far more than that. Imagination gives us the capacity to have faith in more than we can know. But why do we care about trusting? Why is that a value that we have? Well, he said, you need trust in order to engage in acts of love. And I guess that makes sense because you have to trust that these acts of love are meaningful, or else why engage in them? And he said, you need to engage in acts of love in order to renew the world. So, he said, the renewal of the world is dependent on imagination. We will get nowhere without it. Let's fast forward a century to the works of Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, the Rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto. His sermons have been put together into a book called the Eish Kodesh, the Holy Fire, Talk about someone who leaned on a strong sense of imagination. For the Eish Kodesh, imagination was not an escape from suffering. It was the opposite. It was the one inner freedom that no oppressor could take away. It's not just about imagining a better world. It's about reimagining the meaning of our own lives, our own personal purposes and abilities. He and his congregants, his community members, were nearly all about to die in the Holocaust. His words in the Eish Kodesh were written when things were very, very bad and getting much worse. He imagines a mashal, a parable that we are meant to take seriously, but not literally. It's about a wayward prince who had been disconnected from his father, the king, and from any sense of duty. He got caught up with a group of scoundrels who took him hostage and tortured him constantly. And then in the midst of all this torture and separation, the prince felt a strong sense of his father's presence, as if his father was somehow nearby. He cried out, not just his normal level of crying because of his suffering, but extra loud, intense crying because now he had this sense that someone he cared about was close by, listening. This is a form of imagination, transforming unbearable pain into an experience of closeness. It isn't fantasy. It is the capacity to feel connection despite the fact that the world seems to be beating you over the head with separation. In most mashals, the king represents God, and the princes represent us. We're miserable and trapped, and we cry out, and we get this feeling of closeness to the divine, which makes us want to cry even louder. According to the Eish Kodesh, that crying is a sign of revelation. The revelation isn't some brilliant, revolutionary knowledge drop from God. The revelation isn't some euphoria or solving of all of our problems. The revelation is, wow, even in the midst of intense suffering, we're not alone. We're accompanied, we're connected. That's the revelation. And crying out is a sign of this revelation. And then he just straight up says, while you're davening on Rosh Hashanah, while you are here in the pews at services, make noise. Get down on the ground for Aleinu. Say amen for the mourner's Kaddish loudly. Literally cry. Consider what's wrong right now in your world, in your country, in your city, in your community, in your home, in your heart, and believe that your feelings about it matter. Imagine someone listening, literally anyone who cares. That imagination is revelation. The Eish Kodesh was holding a community through the Holocaust. And what he wanted them to imagine was a listener, an accompanier, a sense of closeness. He wanted them to know that their suffering mattered and to feel connected to one another in their expression of it, in their being there for one another through it. We are not living through the Holocaust, but we can empathize. There's at least a limited way in which we can spiritually relate. And as the Eish Kodesh insisted, we can feel a sense of holiness in our emotional expression and also in that of others. As we do, our connection to that which is most transcendent and most meaningful, our connection to God, you might say, grows and grows. I've been studying the Eish Kodesh with our friend, Rabbi Jenna Shah, and as we were talking about his words, they pulled up a blog post by the author Adrienne Marie Brown. Brown describes our world as one of fractals, infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. They repeat a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. And she writes, how we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. The patterns of the universe repeat at scale. We have the capacity to set patterns for the whole system. We do what we can do to create and nurture a beautiful world for ourselves and our communities, and those communities are pieces of the larger pattern, and so they matter very much. They're the building blocks for the whole thing. I feel like if I tell you that about bad things like cycles of violence or the way that abuse at the highest levels of government echoes through a whole society, you know just what I'm talking about. But if I say it about good stuff, like showing up for each other, sometimes it feels like that's not real, but it is. For me, Brown's words are a reminder that what each of us does, even on a small scale, is meaningful. We set an example for others. We make an impact on others. And that is especially true if we connect with one another, if we allow ourselves to engage with community. In community, small acts have major consequences. Acts of love have major consequences. Acts of accompaniment, of aid, of empathy have major consequences. In a world where hatred and oppression are so real, in which even in social justice movements, so many approach their work with a hatred of their opponents, acts of love have the potential to make that much more of a difference. And I believe what Reb Nachman taught, that my ability to love begins with my ability to imagine that my acts of love matter. And I know that in this moment, it might be very frustrating to hear that small actions matter. It feels like a truism, one that is incomplete and insufficient, because it is. There's another layer that's also necessary. Go back to Reb Nachman on imagination. It's almost like a flowchart. Imagination is a prerequisite for trust. Trust is a prerequisite for love. Love is a prerequisite for changing the world in a positive direction. And on that flowchart, we are at the very beginning. What I think is true is that for many of us, it is very early in a very hard process. For many of us, our ability to imagine what better could look like or our place in it has been severely damaged, maybe even shattered. And I don't think we can just skip straight to action from there. I don't think it works on its own. So in addition to doing what we can do and showing up however we're able, we need to imagine that our actions do matter. We need to undertake a project of great reimagining, focusing on ourselves and how we can make a difference with trust and with love. I think this is a time to be learning Torah and thinking about some pretty radical stuff, like what it means to really take care of one another in a community. I think this is a time to be reading sci-fi and spending time in the visionary imaginations of Octavia Butler and Marge Piercy and Ursula K. Le Guin. I think this is a time to be seeking out and listening to the perspectives of people outside our bubbles, beyond our political comfort zones, beyond our income brackets, beyond our generations. I think this is a time to rethink our basic assumptions about how society has to work. It's time to be a lot more imaginative. As the world is renewed for another year, and as we are renewed for another year, we call ourselves to teshuvah, to return. May we return to our ability to imagine, to envision a world in which our pain and suffering is seen and heard, and our hopes and dreams are lifted up and valued. And then, as we are seen and heard and lifted up and valued, may we be able to see and hear and lift up and value the pain, the suffering, the grief, the love, the passion, the hopes and dreams that our fellow humans carry with them. Koach hamdameh, the power of imagination, is that it gives us the ability to trust that our love for ourselves and one another in this world and in this life is meaningful, purposeful, and actionable. Again, we don't just have to imagine a better world. We have to imagine a more meaningful role for ourselves within it, that we are helping build patterns of freedom, loving kindness, truth, and joy, that we're adding beauty to the fractal that is our world through living our lives authentically, meaningfully, freely, and connectedly. We know just how powerless we are. That's not a revelation. But we can imagine and we can trust that our lives, our connections, our communities, our individual and collective existence mean so much more. Together, I imagine we will renew the world. Shana Tova.